a while ago, I did a video about this game right here, as in the 1996 NFC Championship game between the Green Bay Packers and the Carolina Panthers. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. What was unique about this game, other than the fact that the Packers won it and advanced to the Super Bowl, was the fact that the Milwaukee Bucks of the NBA had a game scheduled for that day. However, the Bucks immediately realized that they were second fiddle to the Packers on this day, seeing as there were many Packer fans that lived in Milwaukee, especially because the Packers used to regularly play games there and even have a season ticket package for Milwaukee residents. So the Bucks decided to move their game back an hour so that Packer fans could watch their team play uninterrupted, and then have the Bucks game take place at night at a time where fans could, theoretically, attend both games if they so desired. The strategy didn't work. The Bucks game against the Warriors that night drew just 13,000 fans, which was a couple thousand below their season average, and was a 6,000 fan drop-off from their last home game, which came on a weeknight. The Bucks probably would have been crushed in attendance if they didn't move the game at all and had it directly conflict with the NFC Championship and the aftermath of the game. But even though that was a sample size of one, we learned on this day that football trumps everything and every other sport, and that if your game is going up against the conference championship involving the local team, you've already lost the battle. However, at least the Bucks tried to be smart about the conflict during this game right here. The NFC Championship took place at 11:30 a.m. local time, and the Bucks game was pushed back to 7 o'clock. It obviously didn't work out for them from an attendance standpoint, as maybe 2 sporting events in one day is a tall task for anyone to handle, or fans didn't want to go out and buy tickets after the emotional high of the Packers winning because they were too spent, both emotionally and financially, if they were saving up to buy championship merchandise, or if you just blocked off the afternoon to watch the Packers and need to catch up on stuff at night. There's a bunch of reasons why it didn't work, but at least the Bucks made a reasonable effort to have things work out for them. I cannot say the same, however, when it came to this game right here, because this is the West Virginia basketball team, and in 2002, they did one of the dumbest scheduling things that I've ever seen. Seriously, this is up there with what the Washington Bullets did back in the 1980s in terms of how not to schedule a game. And you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Because in 2002, the only thing worse than West Virginia's actual basketball team was their logistics department. And this is the story behind one of the dumbest scheduling conflicts in the history of college basketball when it came to going up against the juggernaut known as the NFL. Before I talk about that, though, make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, hype up that video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for hyping up the video, and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the time that the country roads took West Virginia to a place they most definitely did not belong. But before I talk about the schedule change itself and just how stupid it was, we need some context to understand what the original game plan was. Because at least when it came to the initial schedule, I cannot fault West Virginia here in the slightest bit. It's January 27, 2002, and we find ourselves in Morgantown for this Big East matchup between West Virginia and Rutgers. Initially, this game was supposed to be at 2:30 Eastern, which, while I'm not crazy about, is a reasonable time. For what it's worth, Rutgers won this game 77-59, completing the season sweep on the Mountaineers. This game on January 27th was supposed to take place on the same date as Super Bowl 36. So the idea was to have the game at 2:30, have it end by 4:30, and then people would still have time to watch the Super Bowl at 6:30, with plenty of time to get back and do whatever they needed to do. We see college basketball games and other pro sporting events take place on Super Bowl Sunday all the time, making sure to end with enough time to get back in time for the game that everyone actually cares about. So you wouldn't foresee any issues with that game as it was initially planned. However, the entire NFL calendar was thrown off when the terrorist attacks on September 11th happened. Because of 9/11, the NFL had to postpone the second week of the season, since there was too much of a security risk and would be impossible to travel in the immediate aftermath of the attacks. And after much deliberation on how the playoff format was going to work, including figuring out whether or not the Superdome, as in the site of the Super Bowl, was even available anymore, because that was a whole issue in itself, the NFL decided that the best course of action would be to leave the season structure exactly as it was, with the only difference being that the entirety of the playoffs would be pushed back by 1 week. This meant that instead of the Super Bowl being on January 27th, it would be on February 3rd, making it the first February Super Bowl ever. And this meant that January 27th would now be the home of the conference championship games, with the AFC Championship starting at 12:30 Eastern, directly interfering with the West Virginia Rutgers game. Keep in mind that back then, there was no bye week in between the conference championships and the Super Bowl. But okay, this isn't the worst thing in the world for the Mountaineers. College events go up against NFL games all the time, and even go up against playoff games. Heck, if you're watching as of this video being released in January 2026, there's quite a few college basketball games in direct conflict with the AFC Championship between the Patriots and the Broncos. You can have this West Virginia Rutgers game go up against whatever the AFC Championship is, just like a ton of other college basketball games that day were doing. Except there was one small problem, because right in West Virginia's backyard was the team hosting the AFC Championship and hosting this game right here. Pittsburgh and West Virginia hate each other in a lot of areas. There's a reason that the backyard brawl between the two schools, separated by less than 75 miles, is one of the most heated rivalries in all of college athletics. But if there's one thing they're united on, it's their love for the Steelers, as not only are the Steelers the most popular team in Pittsburgh for obvious reasons, but they are also, by far, the most popular team in Morgantown. And now, you've got yourself a problem, because the West Virginia basketball game is going directly up against an AFC Championship that the Steelers are not only playing in for a trip to the Super Bowl for the first time since the 1995 season, but that the Steelers are hosting. And it's not like West Virginia could have seen this coming at the start of the season. Aside from the fact that there was obviously no way of knowing that the entire postseason calendar will be pushed back a week, the Steelers have missed the playoffs each of the past 3 seasons, and their over-under in wins, according to Vegas, was 7.5, meaning that the expectation was that they'd be a team finishing around 500. They were not expected to be the number 1 seed in the AFC, hosting the conference championship and making it this far. This is all a way of saying that if West Virginia kept their game against Rutgers at the same time with a 2:30 tip-off against the AFC Championship with the Steelers in it, that they'd be screwed, and no one, not a single soul, would actually show up to the Coliseum. So Big East officials and West Virginia officials got together and figured that it was probably the right idea to move the game and to just concede to this game right here in the AFC Championship, which, unfortunately for Steeler fans and residents of Morgantown, was won by the Patriots by a final score of 24-17, allowing the Patriots to advance to Super Bowl 36 and eventually kickstart their dynasty. That's the good news. The officials made the right decision. However, the bad news comes with what time they decided to start the game. You would think it would be a Sunday night start time around 7 or 8 o'clock, right? If you couldn't move the game to Saturday, which I'm not sure why that wasn't on the table, because the majority of weekend conference games in the Big East took place on Saturdays, you could have put the game in prime time and make the game start plenty of time after the AFC Championship is done. And if you're saying that you couldn't move the game that late because of TV contracts, the game was being televised on MSG Network. There were no NBA or NHL games scheduled for MSG Network that Sunday because of the assumption that the Super Bowl would be held that day. And there was nothing else that MSG Network had to air. So MSG had plenty of flexibility here. However, for some inexplicable reason, when the game between West Virginia and Rutgers got moved, it got moved to Sunday at 4 o'clock, getting pushed back 90 minutes. And this is insane for, well, a number of reasons. And I'd probably make this video 5 hours long if I listed every single reason. But we're just going to get to the highlights and go with the top 5 reasons it makes no sense. Number 1, you had the data point already with the Milwaukee Bucks that this was not going to work. You had that data point from that aforementioned game years ago. I know it's a sample size of 1, but it was significant enough that it should have shown you that this was a terrible idea, not worth trying again. And you found a way to make it worse. At least with the Bucks, there was a 4.5-hour buffer between the end of the game and the start of their game. This is a 30-minute buffer. I'll give you an example of what this is like. Imagine you saw an artist that was doing a concert on the West Coast 3 hours after the Super Bowl, and that artist, which usually sells well, could barely fill up half the arena. Now imagine that 1 year later, that artist decides to start the concert in the middle of the Super Bowl. That's what this was like. You took a bad situation and made it worse. Because this takes us to point 2. The fact that this is way too much of a time crunch. Even if you push the game back to 4 o'clock, you didn't fix the issue at all. Maybe you fixed it for students on campus, but that's about it. The AFC Championship is going to end sometime around 3:30. In what universe, assuming the game ends on time and takes exactly 3 hours or less to play, which is always a variable, are you going to be able to leave your house, get in the car, drive to the Coliseum, park, show your ticket, go through security, buy concessions, and make it in your seat in time for the game to start? The time crunch is still there. Plus, there's probably a good amount of West Virginia residents who drove up to Pittsburgh for the game. Their chances of attending the game are 0. So in an attempt at solving a problem, you didn't actually fix the problem. You did nothing. Number 3, the planning on this was atrocious. Like, genuinely atrocious. It took you until Thursday to announce the scheduling change for this? Look, I'm not going to blame you for scheduling this game on January 27th in the first place. You scheduled it with the information available to you at the time. And obviously, you had no way of knowing that the conference championships would be pushed back to that date and the season would be pushed back by a week. But the Pittsburgh Steelers were the number 1 seed in the AFC. We knew the conference championships were going to be held on this state for a solid 3 or 4 months at this point. The Steelers won home field advantage by a whole 2 games. We knew for weeks now that if the Steelers won the divisional round, that they would host the AFC Championship. This was not a surprise scenario that came out of nowhere. You had ample notice of at least a month to dial up a contingency plan, and it took until roughly 72 hours before tip to let people know that they needed to change their weekend plans when it came to the scheduling of this West Virginia Rutgers game. An announcement should have been made right after the Steelers beat the Ravens on January 20th that this was happening. Or a notice should have been sent out weeks in advance that if the Steelers hosted, that the game would be moved so as not to interfere. Waiting this long to do this was insane. Number 4, the scheduling change completely misunderstands what a sports fan and a consumer is all about. regardless of the outcome of the Steelers game. You're not getting people to attend a basketball game between Rutgers and West Virginia. If the Steelers win, people want to see who the opponent is, or at the very least, watch the postgame show and watch the Steelers celebrate. Even in the latter case, where you don't have any desire to watch the NFC Championship and just want to see the celebration, that's going to overlap with the start of the basketball game. So no one's showing up. And if the Steelers lose, do you really want to go out and spend more money? Is anyone thinking to themselves, after a loss one step away from the Super Bowl, well, that sucked, but we got to go to a different sporting event now? Name me one person that would realistically be in that mindset on the doorstep of the Super Bowl, especially when you hadn't won one since the 1979 season. It's just not happening. No one thinks like that. And number 5, everything about this felt like the worst of both worlds. If you have the game set for 2:30 Eastern like originally planned, you screw over the football fans, but you honor the people that bought tickets and blocked off time in their calendar for this game. If you have the game set for sometime at night or on a different day, you screw over the ticket holders, but you honor the football fans and might get them to come to the game now. But by moving it back 90 minutes, you somehow screwed over both sets of fans. You made no one happy, trying to make everyone happy. Maybe the people that bought tickets originally were hoping to be out by 5 o'clock and then get dinner somewhere. And now, they can't do that. They wanted to beat the darkness, but now they can't do that. Maybe the football fans that would have gone to the game if it wasn't interfering with the Steelers game can't go. This was so poorly thought out, and there was no reason for it to be, because you had ample notice and ample data to show that this was a bad idea. Plus, it's just common sense. And it's going to come as no surprise to you that the attendance for the West Virginia game that went up directly against this AFC Championship right here that you've been watching absolutely sucked. The average West Virginia basketball game during the 2001-02 season, which, by the way, they were absolutely terrible that year, going 8-20, the attendance was 6,500 spectators. The game against Rutgers, it only drew 4,107 fans, or roughly 2,400 fewer spectators than their average. The Coliseum was a ghost town. But hang on, because it actually gets worse somehow. That season, West Virginia played 6 games at home on the weekend against Division I opponents. That's 6 games where there's no work conflicts and where there's no classes and where students and people are generally more flexible. Of the 6 games played on weekends, the West Virginia-Rutgers game drew, by far, the lowest attendance. Over the other 5 games on weekends, West Virginia's average attendance was close to 8,000 spectators. And in their 3 Big East games on weekends, their average attendance was over 9,200 spectators. But the game against Rutgers, barely 4,100 fans, 50% of what they usually drew on weekends. Translation, this was a colossal screw-up both on and off the floor. Going up against the AFC Championship in any capacity with the Steelers in it, even if you tried to push it back to make the problem better without actually fixing the problem, was the wrong move. Clearly, it was the wrong move. So what did we learn from all of this? Football is the king, and a conference championship involving the local team will always be better than a regular season game with a local team that has a losing record and is stuck in the mud. If you notice a scheduling conflict, and this conflict was foreseeable weeks in advance, then you should probably give ample notice and prepare for it instead of just waiting until the last minute. If you have 2 options, and one of them is to go up against the local NFL team in their biggest game in years, and the other one is to not do that, then you should probably pick the second option. And if your strategy to not interfere with the conference championship is to actually interfere with the conference championship and screw over the people who might not care about football, who already bought tickets in the first place, your strategy is a really bad one. Because when all these elements are in play, you can't exactly be surprised when this scheduling backfires. Talk about a dumb decision. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.